Happy Monday, happy Memorial Day. Got my red, white, and blue on to honor remember those who we've lost in wars and stuff. And so happy Memorial Day. With that, we're gonna do our Pledge of Allegiance and our motto. I know normally we wouldn't have school today, but I wanted to finish our book. So thank you for tuning in. It is May 25th, and this is episode 43. Oh my goodness. Here we go. Salute and pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I believe you can see our motto right over here. So we'll just keep the camera there and then I'll adjust it a little bit later. Ready, begin. We are students at Peter J. Shields. We believe in kindness. We are responsible. We are persistent. We are respectful. We are bucket fillers. We drop acts of kindness into everything we do. We are Peter J. Shields. So welcome back. This is our last week of school. Holy cow. I can't believe it. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe and looking for kindness and positive things throughout. When we left off, we were in the room where the square candies that look round. Everybody stopped and crowded at the door. The top half of the door was made of glass. Grandpa Joe lifted Charlie up so he could get a better view. And looking in, Charlie saw a long table. And on the table, there were rows and rows of small, white, square-shaped candies. The candies looked very much like square sugar lumps, except that each of them had a funny little pink face painted on one side. And at the end of the table, a number of Oompa Loompas were busily painting more faces on more candies. There you are, cried Mr. Wonka, square candies that look round. Well, they don't look round to me, said Mike TV. They look square, said Veruca Salt. They're completely square. Well, but they are square, said Mr. Wonka. I never said they weren't. You said they were round, Veruca Salt said. I never said anything of the sort, said Mr. Wonka. I said they looked round. But they don't look round, said Veruca Salt. They look square. They look round, insisted Mr. Wonka. They most certainly do not look round, cried Veruca Salt. Veruca, darling, said Mrs. Salt, pay no attention to Mr. Wonka. He's just lying to you. My dear old fish, said Mr. Wonka, go boil your head. Oh, how dare you speak to me like that, said Mrs. Salt. Oh, do shut up, said Mr. Wonka. Now watch this. He took the key from his pocket and unlocked the door and flung it open. And suddenly, at the sound of the door opening, all the rows and rows of little square candies quickly looked round to see who was coming in. The tiny faces actually turned toward the door and stared at Mr. Wonka. There you are, he cried triumphantly. They're looking round. There's no argument about it. They are square candies that look round. You know, like if you look over your shoulder, you're looking around. Little play on words. By golly, he's right, said Grandpa Joe. Come on, said Mr. Wonka, starting off down the corridor again. Off we go, we mustn't dawdle. Butterscotch and butter gin, it said on the next door they passed. Now that sounds a bit more interesting, said Mr. Salt, Veruca's father. Oh, glorious stuff, said Mr. Wonka. The Oompa Loompas adore it. It makes them all tiddly. Listen, you can hear them in there now, whooping it up. Shrieks of laughter and snatches of singing could be heard coming from the closed door. Oh dear, said Mr. Wonka. They're drinking the butterscotch and soda. That they like best of all. Butter gin and tonic is also very popular. Follow me, please. We mustn't keep stopping like this. He turned left, he turned right. They came back to a long flight of stairs, and Mr. Wonka slid down the banisters, and the three children did the same. Mrs. Salt and Mrs. TV, the only two women left in the party now, were getting very much out of breath. Mrs. Salt was a great fat creature with short legs, and she was blowing like a rhinoceros. This way, cried Mr. Wonka, turning left at the bottom of the stairs. Go slower, panted Mrs. Salt. Impossible, cried Mr. Wonka. We should never get there in time if I did. Get where, said Veruca Salt. Oh, never mind, just come with us. You wait and see. Chapter 24, Veruca and the Nut Room. Mr. Wonka rushed down the corridor to the nut room. It said on the next door they came to. All right, said Mr. Wonka. Stop here for a moment and catch your breath. And take a peek through the glass panel of this door. But don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go in the nut room. If you do go in, you'll disturb the squirrels. Everyone crowded around the door. Oh, look, Grandpa, cried Charlie. Squirrels, shouted Veruca Salt. Jeepers, cried Mike TV. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools in a large table. On the table, there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were working like mad, shelling the walnuts at tremendous speed. These squirrels are especially trained for getting the nuts out of walnuts, Mr. Wonka explained. Why use squirrels? Asked Mike TV. Why not use Oompa Loompas? Because, said Mr. Wonka, Oompa Loompas can't get walnuts out of the walnut shells in one piece. They always break them in two. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of walnut shells every time. It is extremely difficult. But in my factory, I insist upon using the whole walnut. Therefore, I have squirrels do the job. Aren't they wonderful the way they get those nuts out? See how they first tap each nut with their knuckles to make sure it's not a bad one? If it is and it makes a hollow sound, they don't even bother to open it. They just throw it out the garbage chute. There, look, watch that squirrel does nearest to us. I think he's got a bad one now. They watched the little squirrel as he tapped walnut shells with his knuckles. He cocked his head one side, listening intently, then suddenly threw the nut over his shoulder in a large pile on the floor. Hey, Mommy, shouted Veruca Salt suddenly. I've decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels. Oh, don't be silly, sweetheart, said Mrs. Salt. These all belong to Mr. Wonka. I don't care about that, shouted Veruca. I want one. All I've got at home is 2 dogs, 4 cats, 6 bunny rabbits, 2 parakeets, 3 canaries, and a green parrot, and a turtle, and a bowl of goldfish, and a cage of white mice, and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel. All right, my pet, said Mrs. Salt soothingly. Mummy'll get you a squirrel just as soon as she possibly can. But I don't want any old squirrel, Veruca shouted. I want a trained squirrel. At this point, Mr. Salt, Veruca's father, stepped forward. Very well, Wonka, he said importantly, taking out his wallet full of money. How much you want for one of these crazy squirrels? Name your price. They're not for sale, Mr. Wonka answered. She can't have one. Who says I can't? Shouted Veruca. I'm going to grab me a squirrel this very minute. Don't, said Mr. Wonka quickly, but it was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with their small, beady black eyes. Veruca Salt stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws. All right, said Veruca, I'll have you. She reached out her hands to grab the squirrel, and as she did, in that first split second when her hands started to go forward, there was a sudden flash of movement in the room, like a flash of brown lightning, and every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap towards her and landed on her body. 25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned her down. 25 more caught a hold of her left arm and pinned that down. 25 caught a hold of her right leg and anchored that to the ground, and 24 caught hold of her left leg. The one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of them all, climbed onto her shoulder and started tapping her head with its knuckles. Save her, cried Mrs. Salt. Veruca, come back. What are they doing to her? They're testing her to see if she's a bad nut, said Mr. Wonka. Just watch. Veruca struggled furiously, but the squirrels held her tight and she couldn't move. The squirrel on her shoulder went tap, tap, tapping at the side of her head with its knuckles. Then all at once, the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. My goodness, she is a bad nut after all, said Mr. Wonka. Her head must have sounded quite hollow. Veruca kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The tiny, strong paws held her tightly, and she couldn't escape. Where are they taking her? Cried Mrs. Salt. Oh, she's going where all the other bad nuts go, Mr. Willy Wonka said. Down the garbage chute. By golly, she is going down the chute, said Mr. Salt, staring through the glass door. Then save her, cried Mrs. Salt. Too late, said Mr. Wonka. She's gone. And indeed, she had. But where? Shrieked Mrs. Salt, flapping her arms. What happens to the bad nuts? Where does that chute go? Oh, that particular chute, said Mr. Wonka, runs directly to the great big main garbage pipe that carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory. All the floor sweepings, potato peelings, rotten cabbages, fish heads, stuff like that. Who eats fish and cabbage and potatoes in this factory, I'd like to know, said Mr. Mike TV. Well, I do, of course, answered Mr. Wonka. You don't think I live on cacao beans, do you? But, shrieked Mr. Salt, where does the great big pipe go in the end? Well, to the furnace, of course, said Mr. Wonka calmly. To the incinerator. Mrs. Salt opened her huge red mouth and started to scream. Don't worry, said Mr. Wonka. There's always a chance that they've decided not to light it today. A chance, cried Mrs. Salt. My darling Veruca, she'll be sizzled like a sausage. Oh, quite right, my dear, said Mr. Salt. Now see here, Wonka, he added. I think you've gone just a shade too far this time. I do indeed. My daughter may be a bit of a frump, and I don't mind admitting that, but that doesn't mean you can roast her to a crisp. I'll have you know I'm extremely cross about this. I am. Oh, don't be cross, my dear sir, said Mr. Wonka. I expect she'll turn up again sooner or later. She may not even have gone down at all. She may be stuck in the chute just below the entrance hole. And if that's the case, then all you'll have to do is go in and pull her up again. Hearing this, both Mr. and Mrs. Salt dashed to the net room and ran over the hall. Who appeared in. "Veruca," shouted Mrs. Salt. "Are you down there?" There was no answer. Mrs. Salt bent further forward to get a closer look. She was now kneeling right on the edge of the hole with her head down and her enormous behind sticking up in the air like a giant mushroom. It was a dangerous position to be in. She only needed a tiny push, one gentle nudge, just in the right place. And that's exactly what the squirrels gave her. Over she toppled into the hole, head first, screeching like a parrot. "Good gracious me," said Mr. Salt as he watched his wife go tumbling down the hole. "What a lot of garbage there will be in today." He saw her disappearing into the darkness. "What it's like down there, Angina," he called out. He leaned further forward. The squirrels pushed him too. "Help!" he shouted, but he was already toppling forward down the chute just as his wife had done before him and his daughter. "Oh dear," cried Charlie, who was watching the others through the door. "What on earth's going to happen to them now?" "I expect someone will catch them at the bottom of the chute," said Mr. Wonka. "But what about the fiery incinerator?" asked Charlie. "Well, they only light it every other day," said Mr. Wonka. "Perhaps this is one of the days where they let it go out. You never know. They might be lucky." "Shh," said Grandpa Joe. "Listen, here comes another song." Far away from the corridor came the beating of drums, and the singing began. "Veruca Salt," sang the Oompa Loompas. "Veruca Salt, the little brute, has just gone down the garbage chute. And as we very rightly thought that in a case like this we ought to see the thing completely through, we've polished off her parents too. Down goes Veruca down the drain, and here perhaps we should explain that she will meet as she descends a rather different set of friends. To those that she has left behind, these won't be nearly so refined. A fish head, for example, cut this morning from a halibut. "Good morning. How do you do? How nice to meet you. How are you?" And then a little further down, a mass of others gather round, a bacon rind, some rancid lard. A loaf of bread has gone stale and hard, a steak that nobody could chew, an oyster from an oyster stew, some liverwurst, so old and gray, one smelled it from a mile away, a rotten nut, a reeky pear, a thing a cat left on the stair. And lots of other things as well, each with rather horrid smell. These are Veruca's newfound friends that she'll meet as she descends. And this is the price she has to pay for going very far astray. But now, my dears, we think you might be wondering, is it really right that every single bit of blame and all the scalding and the shame should fall upon Veruca Salt? Is she the only one at fault? For though she's spoiled, and dreadfully so, a girl can't spoil herself, you know. Who spoiled her then? Ah, who indeed? Who pandered her very every need? Who turned her into such a brat? Who are the culprits? Who did that? Alas, you needn't look so far to find who those sinners are. They are, and this is very sad, her loving parents, Mum and Dad. And that is why we're glad they fell into the garbage chute as well. Oh, goodness. That's the end of chapter 24. So we'll start chapter 25 tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Happy Memorial Day. Take care. We love you. We miss you. Bye.